Okay, Amy, I'll kick it off. All right, welcome to the Concurrency OpenAI event on teaching OpenAI to understand the language of your business. This is the third or second, depending upon how you count, OpenAI event in our series. So if you find this interesting, we would welcome you going back and watching some of the previous events that have covered different types of use cases, some of which we will show here today, and some of which we are not showing here today. So if you find this interesting, by all means, go back and check some of those previous events out. Today is going to be very focused on talking about business cases, making sure we have a level set of how you can apply OpenAI to your business. We're going to show a whole group of examples that I think will be very meaningful across the group. And then we're going to demo a series of different use cases. One will be positioning OpenAI within teams. Another will be a little bit of how you could use it in an HR context. Another will be around process automation, and several others that are kind of mysteries that I think will be ones that are fun that we'll save for the end. All this will be built into an approach for how you get started with this. So we'll both be walking through the technical understanding of how to apply your data into OpenAI, as well as the soft part of the approach of how do I even get my company interested and excited around leveraging OpenAI as part of your business. So to kick this off, we will introduce each of our presenters, and I'll start with myself. So I'm Nathan Wisnowski. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer. I've been with Concurrency for about 21 years. I'm a 13-time Microsoft MVP, which just really means I'm really involved in the community around tech. I'm also a father of 8 and a Ironman, so I've done a lot of triathlons in my life and love to compete, and so do my kids. And one of the things that I consistently find in both technology and in sports is that I'm consistently not either the fastest or the smartest person, but I always have something to share and I enjoy doing it. And that's my goal today, is really to take some things that we've now had exposure to. I think one of the things that's most exciting is every single day for probably the last 2 months, we've been talking with a company about OpenAI. And most of them are moving into pilots, or they're talking about running envisioning sessions, or they're doing envisioning sessions. So every time we do one of these events, I've got another use case to show you an example of. And it's something I'm so excited because it's taking businesses with their unique missions and applying artificial intelligence right into those missions and helping them to be more effective and helping them to modernize the way they do what they do best. So looking forward to sharing some of those ideas with you today. All right, our next person to introduce you to is Alessandre. Alessandre is our lead data scientist. Alessandre, just tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, it's nice to meet everyone. The lead data scientist here used to be a physicist turned data scientist. And yeah, it's been very exciting to work in this space now. Large language models were sort of an obscure thing a couple years ago. They used to do some things, but computationally speaking, they used to be very expensive to run. So now with GPU chips being much faster and OpenAI making ChatGPT available to everyone, now there's a lot of buzz around this space. We see a new open source large language model coming up almost weekly now. So it's been really great to have an opportunity to take these new technologies and leverage them across many business scenarios to drive value.
Thanks, Alessandre. And then we also have Mac. Mac, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time. My name is Mac Kravitz. I'm a senior software engineer here at Concurrency. Been here for over 2 years now. Interestingly, I was not going to be an engineer. I was actually going to go into law enforcement. I was this close and then ended up taking an entirely different turn. My role on this team is really the integration piece. I love to integrate apps with other apps and make things work simultaneously. So from the app dev side, that's where I champion and make things come to a reality.
Awesome. Thanks, Mac. I would encourage everyone who's on the call today, connect with us on LinkedIn, ask questions in the chat. We're going to answer questions at the end of the session today. And if you have questions afterward, again, connect on LinkedIn, hit us on things that you want to learn more about. We're here to help build this community on a broader basis as well. All right, so I'm going to start with an overview that I think is a really helpful sort of level set of areas where we're applying this capability into businesses today, and especially ones that use unique data that's centric to businesses. That's not just data that exists in the public GPT, ChatGPT, OpenAI, GPT-4 sets. So to break this down in a couple different domains, on the far left-hand side, which you can see, are scenarios that are centric to customer service or status. These are either internal B2B, B2C, or arming customer service representatives with information so they can more actively and quickly address customer questions. These kinds of scenarios are great for OpenAI. They allow you to combine a satisfying customer experience with rapid return of information and helping a customer to get what they need faster. Whether it's a simple answer that's delivered in a chat or it's a more complicated answer that's delivered in a more immersive user experience, engaging OpenAI within your application for these use cases can really transform the satisfaction of the customer, because they have less time waiting, and they have less time either waiting on a call, waiting for a person to deliver an answer to them, or even just they are able to better understand the elements that go into the success of their scenario, whether it's a flight or it's a set of material that's being delivered, or it's a product that you have interactions with them around, or it's something they want to order. All these customer service scenarios really have amazing opportunities for optimization. So that's sort of scenario one. Scenario two is any kind of sales quoting acceleration, or you can even say anytime you have to prepare something for a customer, whether it's a physical product that you're quoting them, or it's a set of financial products that you're organizing, or it's an ask that you have to kind of build a plan or build a structure around. Quoting acceleration, or say ask acceleration, is a tremendous opportunity because it takes knowledge from your employee, and it takes their ability to go and get information to be able to return that, put it into a package, and send it back. All those are repeatable steps if you understand the way people ask questions in a particular space. So this is an area where we've been able to take drastic amounts of data and turn that into responses to customers that lower the time to quote or the time to return to the ask of the customer back to their individual need. So examples of like reduction of say 4 hours down to only minutes, because there's simply less to put together for the individual employee, and faster time to ramp up each individual so they can do the work faster themselves. So that's a really interesting domain. The next domain is probably the most popular and the lowest hanging fruit of the entire bunch, which is data mining. And data mining sort of fits into two use cases. The first use case is like document-centric data mining, which would be like, I've got content that lives in documents, and I want to simply allow a person to get information from those documents faster. That could be like product manuals. It could be HR use cases, like do I have dental plans coverage? It could be analysis of order data or contract data. These data mining scenarios on that side can be really easy. Well, easy is probably the wrong word, but they're low-hanging fruit for us to be able to provide value back to an organization and show the power of something like OpenAI. The other side of data mining is where you're combining those questions with quantitative scenarios. We're going to talk about this one today, where like you're not only answering a question from a document, you're actually maybe even querying a business system. You're asking for, tell me about my top 5 customers by sales revenue. Well, that's not just a document question. It's a question that might require the platform to understand the question and ask a business system for data, return it, and then give that data back to you. So the data mining scenario is really, really interesting. And then this last one, which we're going to show some examples of how to use low amounts of training data to optimize processing of information, is any kind of repeatable processing. Invoice is an example of this, but we're finding many use cases. I've even got a really interesting one at the end that repeatable processes are used around, and it's a fantastic opportunity for you to take something that happens a lot and automate it with a platform that is able to transform it into value and maybe even force multiply the employees that are doing that job. So we'll cover a lot of these scenarios just by walking through them today. So this is the first one that I want to show, and this is a scenario for a boating company that wanted to surface its boat manuals in a way that's intuitive for its customers. So I'll give you a story. So I have a boat, and that boat is like a 20-foot sort of runabout. And one day a light came on in that boat, and I go find my manuals. I'm looking through what this light means. I have to kind of page through and look for it. And there's a boat manual, but there's also an engine manual and this manual, and I have to find them. And I had all the kids ready to go out in the water, and this just totally messed up the day. I finally figure out what this light means, but then I go to the hardware store, and it doesn't really have what I'm looking for. And I'm calling up the boating company and go through all these steps. Instead of that, and ultimately I had to call this boat company to be able to have them walk through exactly what I was supposed to buy. Well, instead of having that, I could have simply asked the chat experience to be able to answer the question for me, especially if it was a common question, which it was, and it could have answered it. So what this allows us to do is to be able to take many of those either customer service questions, or in this case, product manual kinds of questions, and answer questions that are centric to the things that the customer wants. So in this case, I'm saying, tell me about the Sundancer 370. It gives me the citation of where that question, that answer is coming from, just like the modern sort of Bing experience is doing now, but it's doing in the context of your data. This is not something that's on the internet, easy for it to return. It's answering what the draft is. It's answering what the maximum speed is. And then you can see where this data is coming from right within that document. And we're surfacing that document so the person can actually open it up and read the document for themselves, but get the question directly within the chat experience. So what we're going to walk through today is, how do you actually build this? You know, what are the components to build something like this, and how do I make it work? Another example is customer service. So in this upper right-hand corner, you see a kind of pretty common question interface, but in this case, we're turning it into a chat interface that surfaces complicated information. So rather than it simply being like a chat response, not everything has to be just a straightforward yes or no kind of chat response that we did in the previous case. We might be surfacing a complex state of the order back to the user, but helping them to get to this end game faster rather than an interface that's difficult for them to navigate. And this can be another example where we're surfacing your data, surfacing it in a way that's more intuitive for the customer to ask questions of. Another example would be this sales rep interface, where I'm getting an ask from a customer. That ask from the customer is turning into extracted information, and then it's being used to produce a quote that's either accepted or modified. So this is a combination of unique data to the organization, but even more so, what this really talks about is unique language to the organization. So when we think about teaching these kinds of models, whether it's a boat or it's a piece of metal, or in this case, it could be a window or an insurance situation, this is a unique language that your organization needs to understand to serve its customers. It's part of what makes you special. And it's also part of what makes it difficult to scale. So one of the things we found that I don't know if we necessarily understood was going to be the case when we started doing these projects is one of the most valuable benefits is lowering the training bar for new employees. So, for example, this lower use case is about adding a 16-year-old daughter to a family driving insurance. This is a situation that happened to me. I called into an insurance organization and asked them, like, what would it cost to add my 16-year-old? What are the programs? And the employee I was talking with really struggled to answer those questions and struggled to even use the tools that they had, leading to a really sort of unhappy user experience on the customer side. From my perspective, this would have been a great scenario for those questions to be answered asynchronously through the app that insurance organization has. I shouldn't even had to call my insurance agent to get some of the questions that I was being asked. So, or even when I was on the phone with him, he could have used a similar app, which is oftentimes a starting point for these, to be able to answer those questions near term. That's where a lot of organizations start, is they start by arming the customer service rep with the interface, validate they're getting the level of accuracy that they need before they go headless and put it out to the individual B2C customer. So really what we're talking about today is not only how do I teach it data, but how do I teach it unique business language that's centric to you? And there's several architectures that we would use to make that happen. So at a very high level, what we have is a general question that's being asked to a platform. And on the front end of that, we have some of the OpenAI models like ChatGPT or OpenAI 4, or sorry, GPT-4. And the GPT-4 model is essentially a frozen model, right? You're not training it in and of itself, but what you're getting from this is a body of knowledge that allows it to be able to interact with the user, and you're enabling a opportunity to prompt it with information coming from models that sit behind from OpenAI that are fulfilling the data that the OpenAI experience needs on ChatGPT to be able to fulfill the question. And that's ultimately coming from source data. So the number one thing I would convey is when you're seeking the right project to do a pilot is, do I have source data? And if you do have source data, then the question is it valuable enough for me to use to be able to create this so I can actually answer the question to the customer? So what I love to do is have Alessandre start to talk through each of the individual ways that we train OpenAI to be able to answer these questions. Sort of starting with the prompt and then moving into embedding, fine tuning, and then some technical topologies of how we make that happen. And then we'll go into some demos of that. So go ahead, Alessandre.
Excellent. So the GPT models, they have been trained on an enormous amount of data, so they can comprehend a lot out of the box. So to get a GPT model to do the workflow that you need it to perform, the first go-to is prompting. And prompting means that I will give instructions to the chat to a GPT 3.5, which is Azure's versions of ChatGPT, how to either answer a question, if it does answer a question, if it needs some to sound like a customer rep, or if it needs to sound like a helper bot, you can give it sort of that tonality as well. But more importantly, you could ask it to just simply look at a product description and really parse out what each of the terms mean, and we'll give a demo of that. So that is usually your low-hanging fruit, is the easiest, fastest thing to get going with ChatGPT. Is if you can get your entire workflow done by prompting alone, that's the best case scenario. So let's say the prompting is not enough to solve your business case. So the next thing that is available to us is embedding. So there is when you ask ChatGPT, there is a limit to how big the question is, including the answer. And for it's about 2,000 words, 2,000 tokens, which come about to 1,500 words. Now imagine talking about even the boat manual instance that Nathan mentioned. Imagine you had hundreds of manuals to go through, and you ask a question about a specific boat. You would need, in principle, to have access to the entire list of manuals. So you can't necessarily take all of that information and put in a prompt. And this is where embedding comes in. Embedding is a way of pre-reading all of your content and turning it into a format that the part of the prompt is to go and retrieve the relevant information that you need to answer the question at hand, inputting into your prompt, and then getting your workflow done that way. So this is usually used quite a bit for the Q&A on documents workflow. Now, the last thing is if either of these two ways of approaching a problem does not work for you, and you need something very niche, very specific, then fine-tuning is where it comes in. Fine-tuning is the old idea in machine learning where you have an example input X and you have an example of the output Y, and you have a couple of 100,000 of these, and you can expose these pairs of what you want going in and what you want coming out of the system, and sort of fine-tune a GPT model to perform precisely that. This way of solving a problem is usually takes the longest amount of time, is the most costly. However, for very niche needs in workflows, fine-tuning by far outperforms the other two when used appropriately. And this is an example of the second step, the embedding step, where you have part of the system that goes to your, is what we like to call corpus, but the group of the documents that you need information from. So if you look, here's your data sources. It could be SQL, a SQL database. It could be a blob storage. This information could sit in any of your data stores. And here, we're using Azure Cognitive Search to, given a question, we will go to the data sources and find relevant pieces of information to use to answer that question. There is an alternative ways of building the system here. You could use an ADA model from OpenAI instead of Azure Cognitive Search. It really data dependent and system dependent, which choice is better for you. But this piece basically does, it will always perform the same task, which is to sort of read the question, understand it, and sort of associate it to the documents that you have in your data store, and then bring it in. Now, this is where App Server Orchestrator do its magic, and Mac will go into a little bit detail on what this means. But the orchestrator is what takes the full response from Azure OpenAI with the information that you pulled from the database, and that answer will eventually be fronted to a user app experience, and that's where the app UX here on the left side is. And when you have a system that is answering questions on the fly, either like imagine like a Teams bot, for example, that has access to any documents, as it's answering questions, it's going through this sort of workflow where it starts with the app, with the question from the app, sends to the orchestrator. The orchestrator will call Cognitive Search and Azure OpenAI. Azure OpenAI gets you the answer, and the answer comes back to the app. And all of this happens in a very fluid way, so that the user is not necessarily aware of all this one of each individual piece by itself.
Awesome. Thanks, Alessandro. If you have questions about that, drop them in the chat as we go, and we'll do our best to answer them. Alessandro, talk a little bit about this data query scenario. This is one that's come up a few times now, where it's not about documents, it's about it's about a business system return.
So if you have a database that has a lot of tables, and all of those tables have something like numbers, and it could be number of sales, it could be number of customers, it could be date times of when someone make a purchase. You can imagine, and you can imagine these tables to be a lot of them and a lot of data. One thing that GPT models do not do well is math. So you could, in principle, take an entire table and insert it into a prompt and ask, what's the average time that an order is fulfilled by a specific sales rep. In principle, that's a simple calculation. It's taking all of the numbers and making an average and returning it. But this is where GPT is not necessarily good at doing calculations, and you're always going to be very limited by how much information you can put in a prompt. To circumvent this, there's this other method of taking a language, a natural language, as in what is the average time that it takes for this order to be fulfilled by this specific rep, for an example. That language, if you go to an analyst, they are able to write you a SQL query for that gets you the precise number you need. That SQL query can act against the database, and then the database will return a number. This is where GPT can be leveraged to fulfill that workflow, where instead of taking the data from the database and inserting into your prompt for GPT to try to do the calculation. You take the natural language, have GPT write a SQL query that fits your specific database, and then have that SQL query execute against the database, and then the response is the one that is used to answer a question in the app. So in this way of working this way, you're using the tools with exactly where they're the strongest. So OpenAI is the strongest at taking human language, deconstructing it, and producing some outputs like a SQL query. And SQL is just really good at making data aggregations and calculations. So both of those systems working in their intended space coherently together to get you a system that can answer questions that an analyst would be able to answer with any SQL query against any database.
Awesome, thank you. This is one it's fascinating how when people think about data mining scenarios, it frequently moves into this space, where it's like they don't just want to know about the content of a contract, they want to know strategically about their top customer contracts or what was contained within them in a way that requires those calculations to be performed. And the fact that you can use this to create the queries is a capability that's really born out of the work that Microsoft is doing on its GitHub Copilot platform, which we actually have an event on Thursday on, which is something they've become pretty good at, which is the ability to generate the right kind of code for the right use case. So it's not even sort of an edge case for this scenario. Creating code is one of the primary use cases that Microsoft's already been leveraging OpenAI for. So it's a great way of combining the capabilities to achieve a value without sort of taking a misstep approach. Mac, why don't you talk about, man, this is a little bit of a busy diagram, but let's unpack it for people, because we're kind of going from simple to a little bit more complicated to now this is potentially what a multi a capability where we're interacting with the user in multiple different ways through multiple different vehicles, web, Outlook, and then having a series of different capabilities combined together to serve the customer as well. Why don't you kind of talk through this example a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you, Nathan. So the first thing I wanted to say is holy lines, right? We do have a lot of lines, but that's okay. It's important to visualize this, and I hope to kind of discuss this a little bit. One thing I will say is in designing this, there were three things that were top of mind. And I'll touch on all three. And the first one was modularity, right? We designed this to be relevant, whether the goal is to be a standalone Teams bot, a web interface, or an enterprise application that needs to be integrated within multiple facets of the business, right? So, and determining the other thing is determining which tools at our disposal we need to leverage is part of the conversation and part of the thought process. ChatGPT has a lot of hype, and people want to throw it at all sorts of business problems. And it is true that Azure OpenAI and the versions of ChatGPT it makes available to us can be used to solve a lot of problems. And the idea behind this architecture is that our team can use the expertise that we've attained to determine whether Azure OpenAI and ChatGPT is the tool we need from the tool shed, just to keep up with the metaphor, to position ourselves in the right mindset. Now, what company A needs may not be able to leverage Azure OpenAI, may not be what company B needs. That is decided by the use case, that is decided by the data we're working with. And that all in all just kind of summarizes the core of modularity. The next thing, and one of the most obvious for businesses, is cost effectiveness. We want to avoid unnecessary bloating of the architecture, and making sure that we provide the correct resources at the right time for the correct situation. And then lastly, and probably one of the most important, if not the most important, is security. So the architecture is designed to be on the client's tenant, We're separating various resources by areas of concern and minimizing access whenever possible. Now, to talk a lot about these lots of lines, and let me put you at ease just a tad. If you focus at the legend, and this required legend, we have what's required, the minimal, and it's the minimal thing we need. So let's, for all intents and purposes, start with the middle scenario where we have a web interface, where it's a chat or a custom web app. If we follow along with the lines to the right side, we get access to, or we start seeing kind of in the middle, we start seeing the Azure function, our API, and that's kind of the processor that Alexandre was alluding to earlier, which is really the brains of the operation. It takes the information that's fielded from the UI and sends it over to an Azure Kubernetes service that ultimately decides, hey, I'm going to use Azure OpenAI for this, so on and so forth. Now, the fact of the matter is, we may not employ all of these tools, Hugging Face, scikit-learn, Azure Form Recognizer. These tools that you're seeing on this architecture will not be necessarily implemented for all scenarios, and that's in line with the modularity and cost effectiveness. It again is based off of the decision-making processes that we make based on the use case. Nathan, and that's really kind of the high level discussion there. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer, after, or you can use the forms that Amy did mention.
I think an interesting thing in this use case is that in this particular implementation is we've combined, via sort of the secure entry point, open web app, through Azure function, we've combined the capabilities of this sort of starter to enable leveraging a model on Hugging Face that's running in Azure Kubernetes, but then also leveraging capabilities from OpenAI to contribute to what's being delivered back to the end consumer. So oftentimes OpenAI is the right use case for a use case that the customer needs in and of itself. You don't even need to use a custom model. In this case, there's a custom model that's built around doing a function. In this case, it was quoting. But then on the right side, we've also incorporated OpenAI now after the fact to deliver new value add features that we're going to talk a little bit about later into this same customer application. And then that also integrates into scenarios where we're pulling in things from Azure Form Recognizer that feed into this same story. So I think what we're trying to make sure we represent here is that there's a model to do this in a scalable way that ensures that your data is secure, it's in your tenant, it's placed away from public data, but then also it's scalable for building on the right components to keep the platform interacting with the right tools and combining custom capabilities with more sort of PaaS-y kind of capabilities that might exist in an OpenAI platform to deliver on the needs of a particular use case. So you can go from a rather rudimentary scenario that's served via OpenAI, which is really a lot of the production pilots have required really only it. But then moving into more complicated scenarios that might have a custom model paired with OpenAI that have an ability to be able to serve some really unique use cases. So this is something that you can look as a platform to build that architecture on as you look at your story. Okay, so let's go to a couple examples of this in action. So the first thing we want to do is show something that I think not a lot of people have seen, and it's going to seem very simple, but I think it represented in a simple way as one of the parts that's magical about it is positioning OpenAI right within Teams. So Mac, why don't you bring that up and just show, hey, what does OpenAI look like if I put it right within the Teams interface? And the reason why I mentioned this as an initial way for us to start is because it's exactly where people are living right now. Many of the use cases associated with HR or or employee onboarding or common support questions. They live in teams already. Let's answer those questions in teams. So I don't know, Mac, you just want to just talk through exactly what we're looking at here. You're on mute.
That would help. Thank you. So we're looking at a bot, a Teams bot exposed to us, and this bot can exist as a chat or within a channel. In this case, you're seeing a chat bot. It is hosted entirely in the Azure on an Azure in an Azure resource group. It is built using, again, the latest and greatest in terms of the architectures that are provided. And one of the things that we can do is ask it, I mean, any questions that we would expect. So, and you can see some of the examples that you know, I've been working with. But what I can ask is things like, does concurrency, and let me make sure that I don't make any mistakes. Does concurrency allow employees to work remotely? And these kinds of questions can be asked of ChatGPT. And thankfully, I can work remotely. Can be asked of our Azure OpenAI instance to ultimately yield the answer that we want. And whether these, you know, are in the context of a policy or in the context of, as you could see in this scenario or up above, you know, health coverage, these kinds of the questions can be leveraged by employees on a daily basis, right? Made available through an enterprise-wide bot, and ultimately save HR folk trouble, save managers the time of not having to answer these rather simple questions, because it's right there at the fingertips of your employee. And that's, you know, very powerful in terms of making sure that the people that need to focus on you know, certainly planning and making sure that employees have the knowledge, they can focus on other things and making sure that they are well suited, because small bots like this can ultimately yield us, you know, the answers to our questions.
One thing that's really interesting about this type of scenario is we have another customer we're working with where they have maintained a lot of customer support questions in the context of a Teams channel for like years. And they like have these experts that answer these questions in this Teams channel. So what we're doing is training a bot on all those questions and answers that they put in that Teams channel and facilitating a new Q&A agent that lives right within the channel and does it right integrated within their Teams experience. So rather than like building some other thing over here that they have to answer, go over to get their questions answered, we're actually bringing it right within the interface that's the place where they sort of live and breathe every day. And this could be done with Power Virtual Agents or a custom interface that we built here. Either way, kind of centric to the appropriate development cycle. But I think the ability to surface it right within either an app experience that they're already building or using, or in a chat experience like this right within the place they already live, lowers the bar of entry for people to get value from this. And then the last thing I'd note on this would be, one of the companies we're working with, they're just really concerned about people putting data into the public ChatGPT experience. So their primary goal with this platform is just give me ChatGPT in Teams. That's my private instance of it. And then I'll let all my employees use it for different business purposes. And so even that is like an entry point, can be a way for you to say, like, don't just say don't use it, right? Say use our private instance of it that's already in your Teams. Don't go out to ChatGPT to do it. So there's some really interesting use cases even in that scenario too.
Absolutely. And there's two things I'd like to add. The first being, if you're like me, Teams is your lifeline. So this being already in Teams is ever powerful and ever helpful. The other thing being that ultimately this can be paired up with, again, a web portal, a Teams interface, other popular and common chat applications. So the possibilities are endless, and the integration capabilities are really wide in terms of that space.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to progress into Alessandra is going to show a couple other examples.
All right, so let me share my screen here. Okay, so I really wanted to take, first of all, can everyone see my screen? I'll take silence as a yes.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. So I really wanted to go into the very specifics of what does it mean for the GPT models to understand your very specific business language. And this is in 3 steps. First, some examples of what a business, very specific industry or business examples would look like. And 2, showcase the out-of-the-box example for the GPT models. And 3, the demonstration part, which we are on a live code environment right here, on applying this technology and the ability to be able to recognize things to build data quality systems at scale. So some of the examples I have look like this. So when I look at this for the first time before I knew what they were, this didn't mean anything to me, right? This is not necessarily what you would call natural language processing because this language is not natural in a way. But it is very important for certain industries and certain businesses to have automated systems that can not only comprehend this, but really pick it apart. And the example I wanted to say is like 3 of these are products and 1 of them are not. And just looking at it is very difficult to determine what is a product and what's not. So let's go see what GPT can do on its own. So I am here on our Azure OpenAI subscription. This is for concurrency, for our concurrency Azure subscription. You can do this sort of thing even in ChatGPT. What I'm about to do. I'm about to take these examples and simply ask ChatGPT here what they are. But first, just to show you a little comparison, what is the largest country by landmass? Okay, so this is exactly how ChatGPT works, and this is being powered by GPT 3.5. I'm gonna go clear this, and our first very business specific language. What is this? Refers to a screw. Okay, so this is a screw. But not only that, it also says number 8 is inches, there's length. It goes over what F, H, S, and S means. So not only understood that this is a screw, it also understood what each of the terms mean for this product. So that's great. That's a product mentioning, and it understands right out of the bat. I don't have to really worry too much about that. So clear the chat. Let's try another one that doesn't mean a lot. W14 by 68. Okay, so this is a beam. And I think this is a beam that is used for construction. And not only was able to recognize that, but he's also telling me what the W means, what the 14 means, and what the 68 means. So that's great. So GPT understood that right out of the box. So we can do one more here. And that's the third example we had. And we found our one example that is not a product. So this is a FDA regulation that outlines requirements for medical devices and diagnostics. But he had, it's easy to look at these terms and not necessarily know what they mean. Now let's go, the fourth example is also a product. Now that we found the non-product of them. Is not recognizable measurement or unit. It is likely a product, but it's not really sure what's looking at. So this is where the example of, all right, GPT, this is a product mention, and GPT does not necessarily recognize it as a product. And I happen to know it's a product because I made a demo product database. So product database, you see these a lot, especially in manufacturing. You have a product description, product model, and there's two two measurements associated to this product, which is width and length. And if anyone was able to recognize this, these are window screens. So there's about 40 window screens here. So how do I get GPT to then take this product description and understand that this is a model, this is a width, and this is a height? So let's go ahead and do that. So we can do that through prompting. And prompting means just giving some instructions here to the system message. I'm going to just put the whole prompt here. And I'm basically telling the system to say, hey, you're a catalog bot and you read a description of a window screen. That description will have the model along with the width and the height. And please take what you pull out into a JSON format, which is a format that a computer can read, and then convert all the dimensions to a decimal. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take this product dimension in here. We're going to go clear chat. Oh, and what I did here is I did not save my prompt. So he really didn't know what I was doing. So that was an example of what you would do without prompting. Now with the prompt, there you go. Model. So let's go to our product catalog here. 15, which one is this? Actually, let's take the first one so that we can make sure that it's doing it correct. So my first here has height of 20.40 and width 20.40 and height of 15.65. Great. So now I have an automated way to go through this list here and have a system that can look at the product description and know what it is and be able to point to me, this is a model, this is a width, this is a height. And this is really great feature. And I think that the power of it is really powerful. And here's a reason why. I've had the spreadsheet up for a few minutes now, 4 minutes. And there's precisely one error, one data entry error in these 39 products. So if you look at this spreadsheet and you're asked, find the error, that is something that can take a long time. Now imagine instead of 39 products, you have 100,000 products. And instead of just 3 fields, a model, width, and a height, you have something like 50 fields. This can become a data quality nightmare to ensure that your quality is consistent internally with your databases. So let's show how this technology can be used as a data quality system. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this database, product database, and I load it into Python. So there you have it. And what I'm going to do is the input's going to be product descriptions. So basically what I'm doing is precisely what I did before, where I put a product description here and I was able to receive these characteristics of what the product is. I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do that for all 39. And I'm going to do this live, so cross your fingers. The rule of live demos. And there you go. It's going to start running, and it's going to run for a little bit. We can try to find the error here ourselves on the spreadsheet at the same time that OpenAI is going through each of the product category. If someone found the error, that would be impressive. It could be in any of these fields. It could be a model. It could be a width that's incorrect. It could be a height. So anything where my product description here does not match what's in my product database. And a lot of this happens because when you have multiple data sources, for example, keeping track of the same product and whenever all of those on-prem systems got uplifted into the cloud, when you merge the systems, there might be slight differences with how one database keeps track of this versus another. This data quality issues sort of creep up over time. It's really unescapable. There you go. So it took about a minute and 39 records. OpenAI processed them all. And I want to see what OpenAI did to this. Okay, great. So OpenAI was able to create a table that very much resembles the table on my database. So the spreadsheet here is the database that I have, and this is what OpenAI was able to describe from the product descriptions alone. And if you look here, the first one matches up 20.4, 20.4, 15.16. So in principle now, we could go row by row and find the error here, or what I should say, find the discrepancies, because it's really the only thing you can sort of point to. But the idea here is that if your AI system is good enough, it's human level performance of reading a product description and being able to tell me what width and height is. If there is a problem in my data, all I have to say is whenever my data is different than what OpenAI told me it is, show it to me, and then I get to make a decision if this is quality data or not. This is just 2 lines to make the number of discrepancies is number 1. And I just want to see what this discrepancy is. And there it is. It is this 1 line. And you can see here that 36 by 36, 13/32 of an inch was listed as 32 for width. And I can go to my database now that I know what the problem entry is, and it's that one. I would highlight, but I don't know where the highlighting is. But right here, you see the error of the database. Now, why is this so powerful? And the reason is machine learning projects, there's 2 reasons why NLP projects used to fail in the past. And the first one is lack of training data. And the 2 is a lack of quality training data. So going through, having a team of people to go through and make sure that your quality is like high quality data can take a long time. So for instance, it can take a team of people up to 6 months to go over a very large, complicated database to validate that the data is correct. I can tell you that personally, I have been able to go through 100,000 product lines that were much more complicated than this in about a week using this technology. So it's not that it's something that we weren't able to do before GPT. It's that something that used to take a large team of people months to do can now be done by a single developer with using of these tools. So I think the takeaways here for this presentation is that GPT understands a lot out of the box. So you might not even need prompting. You might already have a product category that it understands out of the box. You can use it. 2, GPT can be made to recognize a specific language through prompting. Very quickly, we were able to get GPT to understand window screens and their sizes to match exactly what was in my demo database. And 3, GPT can be leveraged to build these data integrity applications at scale. You can have an automated system to go through an entire database over a couple of minutes, and then have some human doing the follow-up. And not just for data quality, but for data deduplication and entity modeling. A lot of great data cleaning workflows can be done with this tool. Yeah, thank you for your time. If you had any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Alessandro. Okay, a couple more things to cover before we are done here. Oops, wrong deck. One moment. There we go. Okay. All right. So we just went through these two scenarios. This is another scenario, interestingly enough, where data can even be used to talk about content that exists in a video. So data this is total edge case that we had come out of nowhere, fascinating use case, where we were doing video analysis and talking about it in the context of classification engines, which is probably the right way to solve a lot of the challenges. But even the scenario of taking video content and saying, what does this describe? Is the person wearing a seatbelt? What's the speed of the car? Being able to provide information back that informs other things. Any kind of video scenario is starting to become accessible via this. So don't even box your thoughts into just kind of text content. There's scenarios here where you're thinking about image content or video content that might be really interesting to explore and have a lot of value to your organization. Privacy concern scenario. Quick summary of this essentially is that when you deploy OpenAI in Azure, it is private to your tenant and is consistent with how you would use cognitive services in the context of that same tenant. So if you're using Azure Cognitive Services today, it follows a very similar pattern of how that's used within your Azure tenant. So this is different than the public ChatGPT instance where that data is used to retrain models. That is not the case when you deploy it into your Azure tenant. Also note that the OpenAI topology does facilitate an alerting system on abusive content. You can turn that off. So there is a way for you to opt out of that alerting, which does consistently maintain your data is your data and it's isolated only to you. So I want you to have a understanding of how companies are getting started with this. And there's two real ways that we're seeing people start. The first way is you want them to get the art of the possible and you want them to start thinking about ideas. Running group envisioning sessions within your organization, whether you run it, we run it, some combination of the both, has been a really productive way of generating ideas and especially widening the tent. I think one of the most important things is broadening the tent beyond IT. IT is not the place where these ideas come from as often as you might think. A lot of the times, the business is generating these ideas when the tent has been broadened to them, and they start thinking about ways that they can create value to their end customers or automate a process. So start thinking about how you can run broader envisioning sessions that engage large groups of people. This is an example of one that we ran at Generac Power Systems that engaged 100 professionals from across the company over a 4-hour session to help them, understand the art of this possible, run 5 ideas from each group up to, we had 10 groups, 5 ideas each group, talking about these different topics, bringing them back, doing sticker voting, really got this broad group engaged toward picking a pilot they want to go live with within the organization and getting the buy-in across the business groups that this isn't just an IT experiment, it's something that truly is going to bring value to Generac. So something for you to consider within the context of your organization is a great way to get started. If you already have some ideas to get started, the second way we see people start is by evaluating those scenarios. And there's 3 elements that make those scenarios ones that we believe are winners. The first is, do you have data? The availability of data is the most critical element to doing anything with OpenAI on this type of project. Like, do I have something that I can validate or train this against? Second is the scenario worth doing? You may have a lot of data, but the scenario may not have a payoff. And this is a scenario where you really have to think hard of, is this something that if I invest in it is going to deliver value for my organization? And there are so many scenarios that deliver value. So start with finding a scenario that has the data and has a return on investment, and you will get sponsorship from the business because they realize that there's value. Now, sometimes that sponsorship, you have to show them it's possible. And sometimes we have a project we're working on right now. We have to start with a POC simply to show them that it's possible to get past this idea that AI is science fiction and through to the idea that this is science fact. It's something you can do right now and you can get value from right now. So whether it's starting with an envisioning session or starting with evaluating a scenario and picking one, you then move into developing a pilot that has a goal of delivering value on a constrained set of capabilities to the business. and then ultimately moving into a production iteration that's built sort of brick by brick, capability by capability, raising up. But the big thing we've seen here, and this is where I'll sort of close, is these production iterations, we find that companies become capable at measuring the impact of the value of the solution and allowing them to even measure the impact of their own employees and allowing them to be able to help their employees to force multiply using these capabilities. A lot of times the things that we're deploying have never been measured before. And once you start measuring them, there's a saying, you measure, you can manage it. This is then tied to getting the value from the production implementation of a solution like this. So start with envisioning, start with picking a scenario, validating it's the right scenario, and then moving into pilot, and then ultimately into a production iteration. And the ultimate criteria is it must deliver new revenue or operational savings to the business. And if it does, you're delivering on what you said you were going to do. And that's all driven by the kinds of things that we just talked about today. So we'll stick around for a little bit here, maybe 5 minutes here to answer any remaining questions. We're really thankful that you were here. Make sure you fill out the survey when you leave on whether you'd like us to help you with an envisioning session or to help with picking out a suitable scenario for you to pilot. And we'd love to answer some remaining questions now.
I do have one very good, interesting question in chat, and the question is by William, and it says, can we train OpenAI to use someone's email or Teams chat as the source and be able to answer questions based on their previous communications and respond in a way that sounds like a person would have responded? And the long answer to that, the short answer to that is absolutely yes. Any data source that can be either accumulated over time or live, that is text data, GPT technology can be used. And for this specific use case, it is absolutely possible.
All right. Any other questions from the group? If not, we will drop, but just want to give a couple more seconds here for people to ask questions. So there we go. Awesome.
One question from William. How much storage is needed to use OpenAI with a basic model?
That's a good question. All of the Azure OpenAI resources that are provisioned, they are provisioned entirely in that Azure OpenAI resource. So the storage for the model is spun automatically for you. So you really don't have to worry about how much storage you would need to store those models. Those models get whatever storage is needed gets provisioned in the back end without any visibility from the user. So a lot of this infrastructure gets taken care by Microsoft on their end.
The addendum to that question is that William has on-prem healthcare data.
Oh, okay. So if you have on-prem, how do we keep that private? Okay. Any data that you're comfortable moving to the cloud, as in it could be in a Azure database, for instance, or Azure Synapse, any of that data that's already in loaded onto the cloud as part of an Azure subscription, all of that data can be used with Azure OpenAI. If that data is not part of a cloud environment, then you cannot leverage that data with OpenAI. And the reason for that is because you have to make an API call to these resources. So, and the idea is that any data that you use with OpenAI, if it's already in Azure, there's nothing special about Azure OpenAI from a security standpoint. The data that is used with the Azure OpenAI resources is as secure and as private as any data that is in your Azure subscription today. So this would be your Azure databases, Synapse, and any other data sources.
If you did have an endpoint, it was a scenario like you have a database on premise or an external SaaS-based application, you might be able to combine that with OpenAI through if it's suitable for the query approach, right? You're asking a question to a business system that could live anywhere theoretically.
Right. That's a good point. So if you had a very specific need of just having OpenAI generate a query, you could, in principle, all the information OpenAI would need at that point is your table schemas. And that's the only information you have to share with OpenAI. And then at that point, an answer, a question gets proposed, OpenAI gets your query, the query gets executed on your on-prem data. So none of your on-prem data makes to the cloud. So that's a very, very good point.
Awesome.
Bogdan has one question. Can you present an idea about the computational budget, for example, a GPU size, to fine-tune a model?
That's a great question. That's a nice thing about OpenAI. All the infrastructure is taken care. So for fine-tuning, for example, you don't have to worry about the size of the model and what GPU instance you need to provision. All you have to do is to set a fine-tuning job to Microsoft, and Microsoft runs that for you. And by that question, that tells me that you may have some experience with using the open source version of those models. So the open source version, you definitely have to make the computations of how much model do I need, what GPU do I provision, how much that will cost. Now, the nice thing with Azure OpenAI, all of that infrastructure is taken care by the product team at Microsoft.
Awesome. Well, we're thankful for everyone sticking around, and we're looking forward to meeting with you about next steps, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Hopefully this was helpful for you.